The Kyiv delegation taking part in talks in Geneva with the U.S. over the weekend isn't even home yet. But already, Russia is rejecting the European counterproposal to Donald Trump's 28-point peace plan to end the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, top EU leaders, meantime, are voicing optimism blended with caution about the newly revised proposal after the first draft was seen as highly favorable to Russia.
EU leaders meeting in Angola on the sidelines of a summit with the African Union say they are committed to providing Ukraine with diplomatic, military, and economic support. Earlier, CNN spoke to the European Union's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, who made reference to the White House plan that, among other things, called for Ukraine to cede territory under its control.
If Russia could conquer Ukraine, they would have already done so. So to offer them something that they even haven't conquered militarily is, offering something on top of what they already have, or what they have achieved on the battlefield. We shouldn't fall into the traps to discuss all what Ukraine should give away, but bring the discussion back to the territory what Russia should concede, because they have started this war and they are doing the killing.
The U.S. president hinted at big progress in the Geneva talks on a post on social media, saying that something good may just be happening in Geneva.
Meanwhile, the war continues. Russia attacked energy facilities across Ukraine overnight, leaving tens of thousands of homes without power. Russia has been regularly striking Ukraine's energy grid, leaving the country without heat and power during the cold months.
Let's bring in CNN State Department reporter Jennifer Hansler. Jennifer, how much optimism is there that this peace plan, obviously it's being revised, started off as this 28-point peace plan that is highly favorable to Russia, even with revisions? How much optimism is there that this potentially could lead to an end in hostilities, even a temporary one?
Well, we're hearing a remarkable amount of optimism coming out of Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who led that U.S. delegation in Geneva yesterday. He came out and spoke to the press twice during the course of those meetings in Switzerland. The first time he said that it had been the best meeting, in his opinion, since the start of the discussions at the beginning of this administration with Ukraine on this matter. After those meetings wrapped up, he said there had been a tremendous amount of progress. However, he did stress that there is still work to be done. He would not go into details about what gaps remain, but he said that they would continue these intensive discussions. Listen to how he described this ongoing, evolving peace plan.
There were items that we were discussing as part of the original 28, or it evolved. This is a living, breathing document. Every day with input, it changes. I can tell you that the items that remain open are not insurmountable. We just need more time than what we have today. I honestly believe we'll get there.
Now, there are indications, though, that there have been changes from that controversial 28-point plan. We saw a joint statement put out last night between Ukraine and the U.S. Following those discussions, they said that there had been an updated and refined peace framework. Of course, that 28-point plan that came out in the public last week was widely criticized by European allies, by members of Congress, because of the concessions that it was calling for Ukraine to make. Among those were significant territorial concessions, a limitation on Ukraine's military size, a de facto U.S. recognition of parts of Ukraine that had been seized by Russia, which of course would be a complete 180 from longstanding U.S. policy not to recognize territory that was seized militarily. So that came under a lot of criticism and a lot of concern among Kyiv and the European capitals about what that would mean moving forward. We have seen now some steps back to try to ease that up, but of course these conversations are ongoing, and there is the Russia factor of it. They also have to agree to this. This is something that Rubio also acknowledged. This is going to come down to the leaders of the U.S., of Ukraine, and of Russia. Of course, Moscow is indicating they are not going to also give up any concessions, especially when the 28-point plan was so favorable to them to begin with. So we're going to see what happens here. I should note, guys, also, President Trump last week had indicated he was giving Ukraine until Thursday to accept any sort of plan. Rubio yesterday suggested that timeline could shift here. Guys.
All right, Jennifer Hansler, live for us there. Thank you so much. Right, Russian forces are taking advantage of gaps in Kyiv's defenses to edge forward in a number of key arenas, including Zaporizhzhia and Pokrovsk. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that Russia has concentrated more than 150,000 troops in the eastern city of Pokrovsk alone in an attempt to finally take control of it after fighting for months.
CNN military analyst and retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton joins us now. So, Cedric, it has been a bit of political whiplash, I would say, and geopolitical whiplash on the global stage over the last few days. The president just over the weekend chastising Ukraine once again for what he says is not being grateful and thankful enough to the United States, giving them an ultimatum until Thursday. And now you have Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio coming in and saying, no, there's going to be a revised plan, and the talks have been productive, and they're moving on from that original 28-point plan that was highly favorable to Russia. How is Russia viewing all of this right now? Because there are clearly no concessions yet that have been made public that Russia would have to make in order to bring a ceasefire about. And as we heard from Jennifer, this is going to require Russian sign-off as well.
Yeah, for sure, Brianna. And I think what Russia is looking at is, they're going to watch and see how not only the U.S. handles this, but how Ukraine responds and how the Europeans respond. They've already rejected, it seems at least, the European proposal. They may not have a full understanding of it yet, but it seems like they're rejecting it already. So what you're seeing, I think, is Russia just saying, let's see what they're going to do here, and we'll just draw things out. Because Russia thinks that it can actually win this militarily. That may not actually be true, but they're looking at this from the standpoint of the successes that they've achieved around Pokrovsk, the fact that there are Russian incursions in Zaporizhzhia, as Zane mentioned. And so these are the kinds of things that will give them a bit of confidence. They think they can weather the storm. They think that they can, in essence, split the U.S. from Ukraine. And actually split the Europeans off as well. So that's really what they're doing here. They're in essence trying to adopt a strategy of divide and conquer on the diplomatic field, along with what they're doing on the military campaign aspect of this.
Right, and we know that President Zelensky has been very reluctant to lower the conscription age because of concerns that it would have on demographics already strained in the country, as well as the economy overall, which leads to one of the demands in this 28-point plan in the original document that Ukraine would cut its military force to about 600,000. Many Ukrainians view this as not only a non-starter, but also an example of Russia not being serious about a ceasefire, because why on earth would they demand that the Ukraine's military be cut so drastically if there weren't plans sometime in the future to once again reinvade?
Yeah, it's clear that the Russians want to reinvade, and they haven't abandoned that particular plan. It's part of what amounts to their national strategy and President Putin's goals. He's very clear about these things, and on this particular aspect, we should believe him. It is one of those areas where it kind of harkens back to what happened to Germany after World War I when you had the Versailles Treaty. Except the big difference is that Germany was an aggressor nation in World War I. Ukraine here is not the aggressor nation. In fact, it is the victim of aggression. And to have the victim give up a large portion of its forces, a large portion of the manpower of its forces, really puts them on the back foot. At least the attempt would be to put them on the back foot. And that it would really mean that what they want to do is make Ukraine a far less powerful country, even though it really has the capability to, in essence, be at the very least a stumbling block for any Russian moves into Europe. And that's exactly what the West should be looking at here. They should have a strategic partnership with the Ukrainians that strengthens them, that actually helps them increase their military presence and their military capabilities, not necessarily with manpower, but certainly with equipment and with weaponry that allows them to maintain the kinds of things that they need to maintain in order to achieve not only and keep their sovereignty, but also to achieve their particular goals, which would include keeping a free and democratic nation.
Right, and one could argue that Ukraine is the most well-prepared and trained army now in all of Europe, given the
Exactly.
3.5+ years of war with Russia. Colonel Leighton, thank you so much. Good to see you.
Thank you, Colonel.
Great to see you too.